We'd like to welcome you to this session of the Sperry Symposium, and we are pleased to have with us today Brother Stanley A. Peterson. Brother Peterson is from Orem, Utah, and is presently serving as Administrator of Religious Education and Elementary and Secondary Education for the Church Educational System of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He is responsible for the seminaries and institutes of religion, elementary and secondary schools, and religious continuing education for the Church. These programs are operating in 144 countries, all of the 50 states, and over 1 million students are involved. Prior to his current assignment, Brother Peterson served as Associate Commissioner of Religious Education and Schools in the Church Educational System for 12 years. He served as the Dean of Continuing Education at Brigham Young University and Director of Continuing Education for the Church Educational System for 6 years. He is a native of Sacramento, California, and is married to Anna Josephson of Plymouth, Utah. They are the parents of 6 grandchildren, 4 girls and 2 boys, and they have 14 grandchildren. Brother Peterson.
What's scary about that introduction, brothers and sisters, is before I spent 33 years in church education, I had another career in public education in California, so you know how old I am. And I appreciate the introduction. It's been a wonderful blessing for me to watch this educational system grow and develop. And I've seen from the brethren the love they have for education, the desire they have to see our young people educated and our older people educated. I think that started and the tone was set by the prophet Joseph, as he established schools right from the beginning in Ohio and in Missouri for the training of the early elders. In Kirtland, of course, we know he had the School of the Prophets, but he established the Kirtland Hebrew School with a non-Mormon Jewish professor as the instructor. And I have a few quotes from the prophet Joseph's journal, which I think gives you a feel for the excitement he had for this new venture in Kirtland as they started this Hebrew school being taught by a Jewish professor. Let me just share a couple of those with you out of his history. He says, November 1835, in the evening, President Cowdery, returned from New York, bringing with him a quantity of Hebrew books for the benefit of the school. He presented me with a Hebrew Bible, lexicon, and grammar, also a Greek lexicon and Webster's English. President Cowdery had a pleasant journey. Sunday, November 21st, spent the day at home in examining my books and studying the Hebrew alphabet. Tuesday, attended the Hebrew school, divided it into classes, had some debate with Elder Orson Pratt concerning the pronunciation of a Hebrew letter. He manifested a stubborn spirit at which I was much grieved. I won't get into that one. I don't know why that was the case, but obviously they both had strong feelings, and it didn't appear that the prophet Joseph was weak-willed in any sense of the word, in anything he did. His next entry was on Friday the 12th, spent the day reading Hebrew. The 13th, spent the day in reading Hebrew. Sunday the 17th, my soul delights in the reading of the word of the Lord in the original, and I am determined to pursue the study of the language until I become master of them, if I am permitted to live long enough. And then, afternoon of the 10th, I read Hebrew in the office. At the evening, went to the professor's room to be instructed by him in the language. On account of the storm, the class did not meet. Tuesday, the 22nd, listen to this pleading. Oh, may God give me learning, even language, and imbue me with the qualifications to magnify his name while I live. All learning for Joseph had one transcendent purpose, and that was to proclaim the gospel. As in section 93, the final verse says, quote, "Obtain a knowledge of history and of countries, of kingdoms, of laws, of God and man, and all this for the salvation of Zion. Amen." And I'm sure that's what the prophet had in mind as he sought for wisdom and learning and understanding. You'll recall in section 55 of the Doctrine and Covenants, wherein the Lord directed that a printer and a teacher, William and Oliver, were to, quote, "do the work of printing and of selecting and writing books for the schools in this church, that little children also may receive instruction before me, as is pleasing unto me." It's interesting to read a little report of one of the teachers of the children, Elder William McClellan, when he said, "Since the year 1827, I have taught school in different states and visited many schools in which I have engaged as a teacher. In none, I can say with certainty, have I seen students make more rapid progress." And Sidney Rigdon stated in 1838 in the Far West Record, quote, "Next to the worship of our God, we esteem the education of our children and the rising generation." So there's no question, brothers and sisters, of the commitment, the devotion, the dedication to teaching, to learning, to having education available. And there's much more that could be said of that, but I'm going to concentrate my efforts today on the outreach of the religious education and elementary and secondary schools because of the role that I have. Over the last 32 and a half years and the responsibilities I have, I've traveled over 4 million air miles. I have been in 147 countries, and I've had the opportunity to see this program grow up, really, in so many ways. The major universities and colleges of BYU and RICS, LDS Business College, and BYU Hawaii today have 41,000 students. And you know about them, and I won't go into them, time will not allow. So let me just give you a little history that will give you a background, but I want to focus on the future and the immediate past. Seminaries started in 1912 at the Granite Seminary at Granite High School. Our commissioner, Elder Irene's mother, was one of the first students in the first seminary class that was held. The Institute of Religion started in 1926 with the first classes being held in Moscow, Idaho. In fact, this next year we will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the Institute program. 40 years later, from those dates I've just quoted, in the early 50s, the number of seminary and institute students included 35,000. It took 40 years to reach 35,000, and the program was in 7 states and 1 foreign country, which was basically Cardston, Canada, where we have so many Latter-day Saints. The first early morning seminary class was in 1950, and that started in California, where for the first time they went beyond the release time program. In schools where they did not have release time, they were able to provide early morning classes. It was my privilege for 5 years as a bishop in California to teach in the early morning program there. And that was the beginning, those early years of early morning seminary, when the church really began to see some expansion of seminary throughout the world. In 1967, home study started, a program where students would study at home, then one day a week they would get together to work together with a teacher. And then in 1968 it was expanded for the first time to international areas in England and Australia. In 1964, 100,000 students were enrolled in religious education. So it took from 1926 to 1964 to get the 100,000. In 1977, Elder Boyd K. Packer made an interesting declaration, and I'd like to share that with you because I think it was prophetic and profound. Let me just share his comment about Seminary and Institute of Religion programs, and I think you can see that, we'll be able to see that up on the screen. He said this: "In the history of the church, there is no better illustration of the prophetic preparation of this people than the beginnings of the Seminary and Institute program. These programs were started when they were nice, but not critically needed. They were granted a season to flourish and to grow into a bulwark for the church. They now become a godsend for the salvation of modern Israel in a most challenging hour. We are now encircled. Our youth are in desperate jeopardy. These are the last days foreseen by prophets in ancient times." And it was at that time, I think, that we really saw seminaries and institutes, religious education came of age. We started to see it going internationally and an expansion that was exciting. Since that time, we have now, and today I'm preparing to report to the Board of Education for our budget reviews that are coming up. I will report that we have 720,000 seminary and institute students in the church and 147 countries and 9,000 young people in seminary and elementary and secondary schools in the countries of Mexico and in the South Pacific countries. If we include all of the young people as well as older people involved in education of any kind in the church, including continuing education, higher education, seminaries and institutes, church schools, we have 1,200,000 young people and adults enrolled in church education throughout the world. The real miracle, brothers and sisters, of this whole thing, however, is how it gets done, what happens. And that is that there are thousands of volunteers who give of their time freely to bless the lives of these young people particularly. We have 40,000 volunteer teachers who many of them arise at 4 or 5 in the morning on a daily basis to teach young people the gospel of Jesus Christ. Last year, the volunteers donated a total number of 16.9 million hours of dedicated service to bless young people in the classroom. We have, at the present time, a total of 568 full-time missionaries called church education missionaries who are out in the field throughout the world teaching the gospel through seminary and institute teaching, administering, and all kinds of other assignments that they fulfill as missionaries. Under President Benson, a very important and interesting decision was made, and that was to open the institutes of religion to all young people of college age, the 18 to 30-year-olds, regardless of whether they were enrolled in school or not. To that point, basically the focus was on just the college students or students who were involved in post-secondary education. The decision was made that all young people of college age should be given the opportunity to not only have the experience of the religious education, but the social activities connected with the institutes of religion. I remember that day well, as the decision was made, and as I left the Board of Education meeting that day, one of the members of the Quorum of the 12 said, "Brother Peterson, you have just inherited another 1,200,000 young people to teach the gospel to. Are you ready? Take good care of them. You don't realize how many young adults there are until you start looking at a few numbers. For example, in Mexico, there are 222,000 young adults in the church. In Brazil, 230,000 young adults. In the Philippines, 138,000. In Lima, Peru, there's 129,000. There's 1,200,000 young adults that are out there somewhere looking for direction and help. One of the reasons the brethren felt that these young people needed the direction of the Institute program, was there at the critical time in their life when they're making those critical decisions and need to have some religious direction and religious education. In many of these developing countries, brothers and sisters, the majority of the people coming into the church who are being converted are in the seminary and institute age. In many cases, 75 to 80% of the converts are in that category, in that age group. And of course, if we can pick them up, if we can get them involved in seminaries and institutes of religion, we can keep them. A couple of years ago, President Hinckley asked me, he said, what are the percentages of success we're having with the young adults in terms of or institute graduates marrying in the temple and going on missions? And I said, well, we haven't done a survey for a long time, President. I can't really tell you. And he said, do one. And don't make it a long one. Get it done. Trying to decide how to do it quickly, I asked our people to, at random, just pull the records of 1,000 institute graduates from various institutes of religion throughout the United States. We took those 1,000 names of graduates which had graduated 10 years earlier, and we submitted them to the membership department of the church and said, would you tell us whether these young people have married in the temple, gone on missions, or are endowed? The astounding facts that I was able to report to President Hinckley were these. Of those 1,000 young people that had graduated from Institute 10 years earlier, 98% of the marriages were in the temple. Of all of those 1,000 young people, 96% of all of them had been endowed in the temple. And of all of the young men, 96% of them had served missions. 36% of the young women had served missions. President Hinckley was impressed. There is a difference that can come into the lives of young people who have the opportunity to have religious education. I'm beginning to see the results of the old saying, you build it and they will come. Young people are flocking to the institutes of religion. Recently we we bought 2 houses in Lima, Peru. Not big houses, but adequate houses to hold institute in. Almost immediately after we purchased them and set up for institutes, those 2 houses each had 700 young people attending institute in them. They've now grown to over 900, and there's no more room in the inn. They cannot physically put any more in. We just completed building an Institute of Religion in La Paz, Bolivia. And before it was dedicated, we had 1,500 young people enrolled in Institute. I really believe, and I've said this to my people, I think if we built 100 new Institute buildings in Latin America, as soon as they were completed, they'd be filled to overflowing. It isn't just in Latin America, it isn't just internationally, where we're seeing this phenomenal growth. Just to the west of us from here, Utah Valley State University. We have just added our 4th edition in that building in the last 10 years. We now have over 10,000 young people attending the Institute of Religion at Utah Valley State University. As I was sitting in budget review 2 weeks ago, our zone administrator, Brother Hall, said, we need to be thinking about an addition to the Institute at UVSC. I said, please don't say that. We doubled the size of it 2 years ago, but the numbers are increasing by the thousands, literally. We're growing in not just there, but in our enrollments, and the majority are Institute students, by 33 to 35,000 new students every year. And we just announced the largest construction project we've ever undertaken, and that's to build a new institute at the University of Utah Institute of Religion. We have just completed complete renovation of every building on the Wasatch Front as far as institutes, adding significant space. We're just building a new institute at St. George. We've just announced the building of a new institute at West Valley. And on it goes. Last year, brothers and sisters, we had 932 building projects in our religious education and schools area. Those aren't all new buildings. Those are renovations, additions, whatever. But I've watched as the Lord opens doors, as He provides the small miracles to make these things happen. For 2 years, we have been looking for some place to hold institute in Bogota, Colombia. And Wednesday, I was able to take into the brethren for approval a building that just has miraculously come in Bogota, which has been a German embassy and is now available. We were able to buy it for just the cost of the land, literally. And we got the building free, and the building will accommodate about 1,200 students. We just see those little miracles that nobody ever knows happen, occur daily. But of all the things that are exciting, and the thing I want to concentrate on with you now is to tell you about people. The people is the exciting thing that we witness. The dedication, the commitment, the sacrifices that they're willing to make. I guess, and there's so many things I could tell you, there's 1,000 stories out there. Let me start with one that I guess was one of the most impactful ones in my life. President Lee, when I was the Dean of Continuing Education at BYU, I was also the Director of Continuing Education for the church and reported to Elder Maxwell. And Elder Maxwell had me meet with President Lee and President Tanner to get permission from them to inaugurate a literacy program in South America. I went in and asked them permission. They granted the permission. President Lee made an interesting statement to me. He said, "Now just go forward and do it, Brother Peterson. Let's not make great pronouncements. Let's not go putting articles in the church news. Just do it." He said, "Remember, we read about the acts of the apostles, not the declarations." And I thought that was a great way to put it. And so we moved forward. We started in La Paz, Bolivia. I had been down there and met with with various people. We established the program. And then one evening, I was taken by the supervisor of our literacy program to a little home on what we call the Altiplano, which is the highlands from La Paz. Now you need to know that La Paz, Bolivia is 14,000 feet high, the city. And from there you go up to the highlands. And this man, Brother Alacon, who had supervised our program there, took me to the Altiplano to Brother and Sister Laura's home. He wanted me to see them. They had taken the literacy program and had used it in their family. As I arrived, the home was one small room, probably as near as I could figure 100 square feet. The floor was dirt. There was one little door, no windows, and you had to literally get on your hands and knees and crawl into the door. As I got into that little home where the Laura family lived, I realized that in that little room, one room, first of all, there were two pieces of furniture. One was a small single bed. The other one was a little cabinet about that big. In that cabinet were all the precious things they owned. The bed was occupied by his mother and father. The rest of the family, and there were 5 children and a mother and father, and then the grandmother and grandfather, 9 of them lived in the home. The family huddled together on the floor to keep warm. They had one blanket, so they'd put the blanket on the floor instead of over them to keep the dampness from getting them at night. And then Grandma and Grandpa were on the bed. That little family, the father learned to read through the church's literacy program. He then taught his 5 children to read, his wife to read, and his father to read. As we were standing there, we didn't sit, but as we were standing there, Brother Laura went over to the cabinet. He opened the little cabinet door and pulled out something that I could tell was very precious to him. It was wrapped in newspaper. As he unwrapped that paper, he pulled up the family home evening manual and said, "Now that I can read, I can teach my family how to teach them the gospel out of the family home evening manual." Brother Lara became the first Elders Quorum president in the stake when it was made a stake. He later helped in the translation of the Book of Mormon into the Amiran dialect, which he spoke. As we left that night from that little family, the supervisor that had taken me there said, "Brother Lara makes $10 a month. He faithfully pays his dollar tithing, and he also pays his fast offering to help the poor." I don't know when I've been more touched by an experience. I came home and I shared that with President Lee. The tears flowed freely as I explained to him what had taken place that night. The literacy program has moved forward. The Relief Society of the Church works with CES to implement that program throughout the world. I'd now like to take you on a quick tour of some of the areas that I have had the chance to be involved with by slides. So we're going to move as quickly as we can so we don't bore you, but I think you need to meet some of my friends. This first picture, to me, is a classic. It's of our literacy efforts. This is a literacy class in Guatemala. The first counselor and his wife are being taught to read. You notice the candle in the picture? They're being taught by candlelight. You see the young man between them? That's their grandson. He is teaching them to read. One of the things we find is many of the young people can read, but the older ones can't. Also, the older ones will say, "Yes, I want to learn to read, but don't let my children know I can't read. Can you come late at night so that they won't know that we don't read?" The next picture is a literacy class held in the Dominican Republic. We have a lot of our CES missionary couples conducting the literacy program in various parts of Latin America, the Caribbean, and in Africa. The third slide is a literacy class being conducted in Uganda in Africa. Our missionary couples have many touching experiences that they share with us about this. May I just share quickly this one? In this particular class, they started in a class in Azua a few weeks ago, she said. One of the sisters in the class has been a member of the church for 3 years. She started to come out, but then she stopped coming to church. She has a son in the mission field in Santiago in her country. She stopped attending because she could not read and she was embarrassed. A few weeks after this class started, she started staying a few minutes after class each day to have the teacher help her write a letter to her missionary son. After a few weeks, she had finished the letter, and the first letter that she had ever sent to her missionary son was sent to the son. I imagine that lady was motivated to keep going to class. You just need to hear this one little thing, though. After the first letter had been sent, she spoke in her ward and bore her testimony. And listen to what she said. Quote, the sister missionary recorded this. She said, "I just want to share my testimony of the gospel with the ability to read. Then I will feel more happy. I have faith in God that I will learn. Really being able to write a letter to my son is not the most important thing. What I want to be able to do is preach the gospel, to really know and to testify of the truth. When the members, the other ladies come by and say, 'Sisters, let's go out and share the gospel,' they have their scriptures and all," she says. "I don't even want to go because I can't read. All I want to be able to do is preach and share the gospel. I'm learning to read so I can spread the gospel." The next picture is a group of literacy students in Papua New Guinea. Again, you see the humble circumstances under which they learn to read. In Papua New Guinea, 80% of the adults are illiterate. And there are 700 recorded languages in Papua New Guinea. Can you imagine the confusion and the difficulty they have? In this particular group, there's a little sister who had never been able to write her name before. On the third lesson, They learn to write their own name. And on the fourth lesson, this little sister arrived 45 minutes early for the class. As she came in, the missionary who was teaching them went outside, and this sister was writing with her finger on the missionary's car, on the dust on the car. And the teacher, a little bit irritated, said, "You are writing on my car." And she said, this little sister delightedly said, "I write my name, I write my name." It was the first time she'd ever been able to write her name. Parenthetically, I want you to know that not all of the people who cannot read are in Africa or Latin America. They are here in the United States. One of our CES coordinators in Pensacola, Florida, told of an experience he had where a sister was called to teach the literacy class. Her non-member husband had always been very supportive of her, but he inquired as to what she was going to be doing. And then the husband said to her, "Do you know why I have never joined your church? When I attended, I noticed the members all used hymn books, and they were called upon to read from the scriptures. I wanted to do that, but I couldn't." This woman, who had been married to this man for 15 years, learned for the first time that her husband could not read at all. He requested that he be included in the program since she would be the teacher. She warned him, she said, "The scriptures are what we use for our text." He said, "All the better." You won't be surprised to learn he's now joined the church. But this program that we have is scripture-based. They learn to read out of the scriptures. The next picture is one of 3 rooms in a little home in a plantation in Zimbabwe. These people give their home over to church education 3 times a week so that they can teach. One of the 3 rooms is used for a seminary class. The other 2 are for teaching literacy. And the people actually go outside and cook their meals because they don't want to interrupt the classes. But they turn their little house, and it is not very big, over to that purpose. The next picture is students in a seminary class in South Africa. Now this one I'm intrigued by because these students lost their teacher during the year. The teacher quit. And they did not want to stop seminary, so they appointed one of their own. The young man in the back in the sport coat became the seminary teacher, one of the students, and they continued on with the teaching of their class for the rest of the year. The next year he was called to be the permanent teacher. My question is, do you think in the United States, if the students had lost their seminary teacher, they would appoint one of their own, or that one of their own would have accepted to teach? But there, they just move on. We underestimate many times the talent and the ability of these people. The age of the leaders is amazing. I remember going to a small village in Patsasilla, Guatemala, and I met the primary president there. She had her little flock of students. They gathered together and sang "I Am a Child of God" to me in Spanish. I asked her age. Now that's not very good to ask a lady her age. She told me she was 14 years old and she was the president of the primary. I remember in Mexico City going to a young adult conference where I spoke. About 3,000 young adults there. All of the stake presidents were sitting on the stand. 2 of those stake presidents, I asked them how old they were. I couldn't tell them from the young adults. They were 23 years of age. A 23-year-old kid in the United States, we hardly ask them to pray. And they're stake presidents. It's amazing. Let's move on. This is a Soweto township in Johannesburg, South Africa. One of the things that we find, you might think, well, in these far out areas, they probably don't have very good teaching. Brother Lake took this picture of this teacher who's standing. He said, "This lady, Gladys, was probably the finest teacher I've ever seen in all of my years as supervisor of seminaries and institutes." He said, every one of those young people in that classroom knew the 100 basic scriptures for seminary and institutes or seminary students. They used them regularly. They had them all memorized. And he said that teacher was as motivating and as exciting a teacher as I have ever seen in my life. And that is not unusual. The exciting thing is the scripture-based program we now have. I just don't go anywhere where I don't go into a classroom and the scriptures are open, the young people are using them, the teachers are using them. The next is a group of photographs that I'll show you from Kenya. This first picture is a little boy hauling that lumber up the mountain to a chapel site where a chapel is being built. The incline is so steep, you can't tell it from the picture, but it's so steep that no vehicle can get up the mountain. So everything is hauled to the site of the chapel by people. And look at the size of those boards for that little boy. He's got it over, as you noticed from his back, the strap over his head. And that to me would be terrible. But let me show you the next picture. These are two sisters who are carrying lumber up the hill. And if you've ever carried lumber, you know how heavy boards that big would be. Next is the unfinished chapel where these folks are, from the background you can see the chapel that they're building and all of the material they're bringing by hand up the hill. The next picture is also in this same area in Chulu, Kenya. First of all, I have to tell you about my budget review with Brother Brian Weston, who's my zone administrator over that area. He happens to be here this morning. But last week, as we were doing his budget, he said our CES man in Chulu, Kenya is the only way he can get around. Now, there's no electricity, there's no telephones there. He says the only way he can get around is on a bicycle. And so he puts in for bicycle tires for us to pay for his bicycle tires as he goes around doing his assignment. And because of the kind of roads they have, last year he went through 8 bicycle tires. But that's the expense of travel for this man in Chulu, Kenya, is 8 bicycle tires a year. Well, I've got to tell you this story about this little group of people. In that group, there are 40 people who are preparing to be baptized. The story is that they have a very unique way of preparing for baptism. Let's look at the next picture. You'll see a baptismal font. It's a tin circled tub. It takes them about 5 hours to carry water from a long distance away and pour it into that tub to get it ready for the baptism of those 40 people they're going to baptize. They carry the water, they dump it in from containers and fill it up. When they get it far enough up that they think they can now have the baptism, because it's easier to use people than water, they put all of the little kids from the branch around the inside of the metal tank to raise the level of the water higher, and then they get it high enough and then they can perform the baptism, and the little kids don't take up so much room that there's not room for the baptism. They're very ingenious. In the African continent now, we have 10,087 students enrolled in seminary and 11,147 students enrolled in institutes in 25 different countries. What you see here is a group of people standing in front of the chapel that we had in Chulu, Kenya. Now, it doesn't look very fancy, and it isn't, because it used to be a chicken coop. And the chicken coop was then changed to a chapel for those people in Chulu, Kenya. If you can see the sign and read it, it says that it's the church, it's our chapel. Now let's go to the next slide. That's the replacement building. Can you imagine how thrilled they were? That's the building you saw earlier that was being constructed. It's now completed. And in the next slide, you can see the students in there having what we call a Super Saturday. A Super Saturday is when they do home study seminary, they get together every month or so and have a big meeting with all of the early morning or the home study students, and they're instructed. That's a Super Saturday in Chulu, Kenya. Now moving quickly on to another part of Africa, the next group is a group of volunteer teachers who are being trained. This is an in-service training meeting for those volunteer teachers in Brazzaville, Congo. Let's move on. Here's a seminary class in the Congo. Let's never forget as we deal with all the numbers and all the other things, that it's these young people, it's the children that are being blessed from the program we get involved in. I keep reminding our people, don't think this would be a great program if it wasn't for all these bothersome children, but that's why we're here. And what a wonderful blessing they are. Next is a group of our volunteers in Kinshasa, Zaire, who have met together for an in-service meeting. These are mostly young people, but they are the teachers in the program. We add to that, in the next picture, the priesthood leaders. And you can see that group of beautifully dressed, prepared people who are involved in church education. Next is one of our CES teachers. He is actually a supervisor. He directs our CES programs in Zaire, in the Congo, in Cameroon, and in the Central African Republic. Now, if you see that little group of people, those are all his family. The reason I'm showing you this is to give you a greater appreciation for your blessings. This sweet man and his family, who are pictured here, live in a 2-room house. They have 1 bedroom and a living room. They cook outside. They have a married daughter and her husband who also live with them, and they cannot afford their own home, so they're there with 11 children, plus the father and the mother, the married daughter and her husband living in that home. They walk an hour to church, no transportation. Our CES administrator reported when he went into the home it was as clean as a pin, just neat and beautifully done. You try to have that many people live in 2 rooms and see what your house looks like. Now let's jump to another part of the world. Again, I know we're moving quickly, but I just want to give you the flavor of what's going on. This is a Bangalore, India, a seminary class in Bangalore, India. The next slide I'm going to just hold for a minute because I want to give you just a little history of this next slide. It's in Pakistan. And I want to tell you about the miracle of the gospel in Pakistan. That started from 2 men that were on a United Nations project they had been asked to start a United Nations project in Pakistan. They both happened to be members of the church. They asked the brethren if they wanted them to do anything in Pakistan to help the church, and they were told, we are going to set you apart as the branch presidency of the first Pakistani branch. When they went over there, these 2 high priests became the first branch presidency. There was a man over there who had been introduced to the church through some books he found. He came over here and was baptized. He asked his family to support him to be baptized in the church, and he came over here and was baptized in the font in the tabernacle some 18 years ago. He waited all those years for something to happen, for the gospel to be preached, and for him to be able to exercise his priesthood. Well, exercise just get involved in the church. He waited all those years, and finally these 2 men came. They said when they got there, this man had been teaching the gospel. He had a whole congregation of people ready to be baptized. This man, at the first baptism that they held after the new branch presidency came, the first item of business was to ordain this first brother who had been teaching the gospel to the Aaronic priesthood. He was ordained a priest, and then he baptized all of these people that he had been teaching the gospel to. The first seminary teacher in Pakistan came about in an interesting way. I was in Singapore, met the missionary couple who were introducing the Seminary Institute program in Pakistan. They said, let us tell you about our first seminary teacher in Pakistan. They said a friend of his went to England to school. When he got to England for school, during that time he was there, 2 missionaries met him and gave him a Book of Mormon. He never did anything with that Book of Mormon. But what he did do is he took it back home to Pakistan and gave it to a friend of his. The friend read it. He gave it to his wife. She read it. His brother read it. Well, out of that Book of Mormon, that a young man from Timpview High School, a 16-year-old boy, had done what Brother Top was saying this morning. He wrote his testimony, put his picture in the Book of Mormon, and contributed it to the church. That Book of Mormon found its way to England, from England to Pakistan, And 32 people joined the church as a result of that 16-year-old young man's testimony and Book of Mormon, including our first seminary teacher in Pakistan. His name is Sean Dixon, in case any of you should know Brother Dixon. That's the result. Now let's see Pakistan in the slide. That's a class in Pakistan. Well, there are so many other things that I could share with you. Because of time, it's obvious that we're done. Brothers and sisters, the miracle of what's going on as we watch these young people. I hope you appreciate your blessings. I hope you appreciate what you have been given. I want to conclude with a story of a young man who lives in Mongolia. The church programs are moving in Mongolia. We have seminary and institute students. At the last district conference, a 60-voice institute choir sang for the district conference. But one of my men was just in Mongolia at a seminary class. And as he was with those 14 young people in the seminary classroom, they asked him if he'd like to speak to them. He got up and he was watching a Book of Mormon class. He then said to these young people, these 14 young people, first of all, how many of you have been a member of the church more than a year? Only 2. Then he said to them, you've been studying the Book of Mormon class. How can you know that the Book of Mormon is true if, well, he asked them, how many of you know the Book of Mormon is true? They all raised their hand. He said, how can you know it's true? You don't even read the Book of Mormon. You haven't ever seen it. They don't have the Book of Mormon in their language. He said, how can you know it's true when you've never even read it? And one of the young boys, a 14-year-old boy, gave this reply. He said, Brother Cole, let me explain it this way. Have you ever seen a beautiful cake and you had just a little bite of it and it was delicious and you knew it was all good? He said, we have had a few verses of the Book of Mormon translated for us, verses about the Savior, and we have read those. And we know those verses are true. And because we know those verses are true, we know the whole Book of Mormon is true. We have access to thousands of copies of Book of Mormons if we want them. This little group are literally taking the crumbs off the table. And from those crumbs, they are gaining a testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. How blessed we are, and how much we have yet to do to bless the lives of the people of this world, to let the gospel continue to roll forth to fill the earth. We have done much, but there is much more that we must do. May the Lord help us to catch the vision, the opportunity to serve missions, to give of ourselves, of our means, to do those things that we can do to bless the lives of those hungry people out there looking for the truth, pleading for an opportunity to hear the gospel. God bless you all, that we all together may do our part. Because we have been given much, we too must give. I leave you my testimony and my love. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.